to posting the agenda. So we are now done with items 1, 2, 3. We are going to item 4, which is public comment. Any member of the public may address the board of directors concerning any matter not on the agenda. Do we have any such requests? Okay. Not seeing any, I will move to the consent agenda and ask the board if they have any questions, and if they don't, I would like a motion and a second for the consent agenda.
This is Sonoma. I would move approval of the meeting minutes. And do I see any other items on consent?
No, that is it.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay, that was Don Weiss from MCE. Before we go to a vote, let me ask if there's any public comment on the consent calendar. Not seeing any.
Garish, I just wanted to note one correction needed on the minutes.
Okay, please.
Under item 5, the fourth line down, it says Deputy Mayor Rick Bonilla. The spelling should be the same as on the first line.
Yep, got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. With that correction noted, let me ask for a vote. And
Mr. Chairman, we can do a voice vote for the consent agenda.
okay, great. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any noes? Abstentions? None. So unanimous. We're now moving to item 6A, the ad hoc committee report regarding the selection of the general manager. We have Tom Habashi, Don Weiss, Laurie Mitchell, and myself on this ad hoc committee for selecting the general manager and the general counsel. So first, I'd like to thank Don Weiss and Marine Clean Energy for offering staff support for the hiring of the general manager. We have posted it on the Talent Hub at LinkedIn using MCE's infrastructure. Thank you very much, Don. Jim Shetler and myself and Tony Braun have reached out to more than a dozen people outside of the application process in LinkedIn, just with contacts we've had. Thank you all board members for sending the job description and the link to the LinkedIn application to your contacts. Please continue to do so. We are now in the process of shortlisting, and early next week, we'll have a meeting of the ad hoc committee to get a shortlisted set of candidates. We are, at this point, we are on track for bringing you a selection at the June board meeting. So that's my update on item 6A on behalf of the ad hoc committee. Any questions from the board on item 6A? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to item 6B, which is the ad hoc committee report on the selection of the general counsel. We issued a RFP on March 24th. Responses were received on April 12th. We have conscripted Greg Stepanisic, the general counsel of SVCE, to assist us with this process, and also Jim Shetler, our interim general manager. We have scheduled interviews with the shortlisted respondents for next week on April 27th and 28th. So the ad hoc committee will be interviewing and most likely making a selection after the interviews next week. We are on track at this point to bring a recommendation to the board at the May 19th CC Power meeting for selection of the general counsel. Any questions? Okay. And I should ask also any questions from, or any comments from the attendees on items 6A and 6B. Seeing none, I'm now going to move to item 6C. And this would be the ad hoc committee report on policy development. And I'll hand it over to our interim general manager, Jim Shetler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We do have a staff recommendation relative to the LDS project procurement conditions. But before we get into that, I thought I'd turn it over to the ad hoc committee members to see if they had any updates or comments they wanted to make relative to status on the policy development. Okay, hearing none. I
Oh,
will
I have
note.
one.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. I had a further conversation with one of the people who attended the meeting with us last week with the Labor and Environmental Committee. And they had asked that the specific reference in the revised conditions for the LDS, the item 1 workforce require payment of prevailing wages. They had asked that the specific government code be noted there. I had asked them to provide me with the exact language that they wanted. I don't believe I've received that, but I just wanted to present that and suggest that in order to be more precise, if the committee and the board so desired, that we note the government code.
Thank you, Director Pepper. And I will note that, like you, I've had an opportunity to have some dialogue with some of the parties we talked to last week. And when we get to that item coming up next, I do have some of the language that they've shared with me that I can share with the board on what their proposal is. If there are no other comments, I just would make note that, as Director Pepper mentioned, that we did have an opportunity last week to meet with representatives from the unions and the environmental community. I thought it was a very productive meeting. I had a lot of good dialogue and input. And I know the intent of the ad hoc committee to take that input as they consider development of policies going forward. With that, I'd like to bring up the item relative to the LDS procurement effort. As the board knows, the RFO and the proposals in response to that went out last year and were received last year. We've been in the evaluation process. We're getting close to wanting to get to a short list. I thought I would give kind of a very quick update on where we're at. Right now, we're into a round 2 evaluation process on the proposals that we received. We are anticipating in the next week to have completed that evaluation process. Our intent is to get to a short list of recommended projects by the end of April. This will be done by the Project Oversight Committee and providing insight or recommendation to the general manager. And then in parallel with that, the Project Oversight Committee is working with the negotiating team, our 2 consultants that we brought in to help with negotiations, along with general counsel and general manager, on developing negotiating principles and draft agreements that we can use for negotiations, assuming we go forward with that later this summer. And then, of course, the Project Oversight Committee will be the advisor to the negotiating team as we get into negotiations. In the board packet, we did provide a suggestion around language for the LDS project procurement conditions. And as I noted, we are in a bit of a unique situation in that CC Power has inherited the results of the RFO and the proposals that have been provided in the middle of evaluation. But we're also sensitive, and the participants in the LDS project are around some of the issues that have been raised in public comment here at the board. And so we wanted to try to address as much as we can, recognizing where we're at in this process, at least considering these issues as part of our evaluation. And so there's language in the packet for workforce, environment, and environmental justice. And we are recommending that the board consider this, and we'll be eventually asking for board approval on a set of language that we can use in the evaluation, and to the extent appropriate, incorporate in any negotiations and agreements we may end up negotiating for the LDS project. With that said, if we can move back to the workforce section. Subsequent to the posting of the packet, we have had opportunity to have dialogue with some representatives from labor and the environmental community, and they have offered up some revision or revised language on item 1. But before I get into suggesting anything on that, I would recommend, Mr. Chairman, that I think it might be appropriate to open up public comment and allow those entities who wish to comment on this. And if that means we need to make a motion, I would suggest we might want to do that.
I think before we get to public comment, let's see if we have any questions from the board that are clarification questions. Then we'll move to public comment and then come back for discussion and a motion. Would that work, Jim?
That works.
Dawn, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
a question.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I'm not on this subcommittee, and I am just wondering if there, if we are going to incorporate PLA related language, would we be including a no disparagement clause? I have concerns about some disparagement issues that are currently happening with IBAW 1245 in Stockton, specifically naming MCE. And that's unfortunate, because we want to make sure that we're working as partners and not spreading misinformation. So I'm just wondering if that's come up in the discussions of the committee.
At a very high level, but we have not got into any details around that, and did not have discussions on that for the particular issues on the LDS project. We're anticipating we would have more if we get into more detailed policy discussions for the larger, longer term policies.
Okay, well, I would just ask the committee to consider if we are going to put include language in the LDS project around the PLA, that there be a no disparagement clause included in the PLA.
Dawn, thank you. Let's continue with clarifying questions, and I think this issue will come back after we get public comment. We can discuss it as a board in terms of if we want to make any changes or provide direction to the ad hoc committee of the general manager. Other?
I do have a question.
Okay.
We are working on a short list now. Is it the plan to take this language on workforce and share it with those who we'll be negotiating with, to let them know that you could be subject to additional shortlisting? Because it looks like you got a 5 points here that you want to give to folks who will have a language related to PLA. So does that mean we get to we have additional work to do on the shortlisting, or and that would that 5% with 5 points comes in?
So a couple of points around that. One is we have done some surveying questions to the proposers around different aspects of their proposals, and one was around their willingness to do PLA. So we do have some background and understanding on that. And then, yes, we would be letting people know that these requirements are being evaluated. Yes.
So there will be additional screening, is that what you're saying? Of the short
Yes.
list to get to a shorter list?
Yes.
It's, if I may add to it,
Are we given those proposals also the thumbs up to change the price that they offered, or we pretty much saying we are using the price they offered? It's just that additional 5% will go to those who will put in a PLA in place, or at least propose a PLA.
So we are not proposing allowing any price adjustments.
Okay.
other clarifying questions from the board? And if you don't mind, just in case, try and use the raise hand so I don't miss you, but feel free to jump in too. We are just 8 of us here, so I think I can see most of you. All right. I think we are ready to go to public comment. And Andrea will be managing public comment.
Great. Thank you, Chair. So we have 3 attendees who are wishing to speak. We will start with James Rio Gomez, followed by Brett Garrett and Thomas Enslow.
James, you need to unmute yourself, please.
James, thank you.
Yeah, all righty. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, board members. My name is James Gomez, and I speak before you today representing the Federation of Bay Area Building and Construction Trade Councils. Collectively, we represent over 180,000 rank and file union construction workers who live and work throughout the Bay Area. I want to speak to the recommendations of the long duration storage project and enhanced conditions from staff and how we think this is a good start, but it's important that California community power policies go further to ensure quality craftsmanship, apprenticeship standards, and local hiring opportunities. For reference, your enhanced conditions require the payment of prevailing wage, which is important to ensure that working women and men can make a respectable living. However, the point directly following this only encourages the use of apprenticeship programs. Apprenticeship programs, specifically joint labor apprenticeship programs, are the pathway for our Bay Area residents to start a career in the trades, and that these programs produce a highly skilled and trained workforce. A way to improve this language is to ensure apprentices are utilized on this project is to insert language complying with California Labor Code. Ultimately, we think you should move forward with these enhanced recommendations, and we commend staff, but we think it's important to take this opportunity to speak to the values of California Clean Power should focus on when you are working on broader policies. When broader policies come back to the board from staff, we would like the skilled and trained workforce requirements, labor code compliance, and apprenticeship standards applied. I am more than happy to be a resource for staff on this, so please feel free to reach out. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, James. Next, we will have Brett Garrett, followed by Thomas Enslow and Melissa Yu. And Brett, whenever you'd like to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, yeah, this is Brett Garrett from Santa Cruz. I support the proposed enhanced conditions, and I want to suggest 2 additions that I think might be important. One, under the environmental considerations, I would include a strong preference for using environmentally friendly materials that can be easily recycled. Currently, it just says to meet permit requirements and avoid hazardous areas, but the choice of technology is a very important factor in determining the environmental impact of a storage project. And secondly, there should be a very strong preference for local projects within our service territories, or better yet, distributed throughout the service territories. And On this topic, I want to give appreciation for something that Tom Hibashi presented to the 3CE Operations Board just last week, where he was saying that they found that small storage has more or less the same price per kilowatt hour or kilowatt, whatever the right unit is, as a large storage facility. In other words, there's not much economy of scale in storage projects. And in fact, it's very practical to distribute storage throughout the service territories. We should have storage facilities on every distribution circuit, and CCAs should be leading the effort to distribute these storage facilities throughout their territories. We need local projects that will employ local workers, reduce our dependence on transmission infrastructure, and provide local resiliency in case the transmission network goes down. Please support microgrids and virtual power plants. Even if it costs a little bit more to reduce transmission needs, it's worth it to improve resiliency, and it may eventually improve the overall utility rates that people are paying. So in summary, I propose 2 additions to the enhanced conditions. Number 1, state a preference for environmentally friendly materials that can be easily recycled. And number 2, state a preference for local projects distributed throughout our service territories, or at least located within or near our service territories. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brett. Next, we will have Thomas Enslow, followed by Melissa Yu. And Thomas, whenever you're ready to unmute.
Good afternoon. Tom Enslow on behalf of IBEW 617 and IBEW Local 6. First, I'd like to thank Jim Shetler and the members of the Policy Subcommittee for meeting with my clients and other stakeholders, including NRDC and the Climate Center, to discuss the adoption of formal CC power, labor, and environmental policies. We've had very productive conversations with them, and we truly appreciate them taking these issues seriously. The policy before you is just for the long duration storage project, and it was agreed that to propose an interim project specific policy for this project in order to provide time to come to a resolution for an overall policy without slowing down the process for getting this project off the ground. We support these staff recommendations with just a few minor changes. We think it's pretty close. The major change is, rather than just references, generally saying there's a requirement to pay prevailing wage, it's more useful to actually cite the specific standards. So the language, and I've provided Jim Shetler the precise language, but we're asking that it be changed to say that any construction work contracted by parties in furtherance of this agreement, whether or not it is a public work as defined by the Labor Code, Section 1720, shall comply with California prevailing wage provisions applicable to public works projects, including but not limited to those set forth in Labor Code Sections 1770, 1771, 1771.1, 1772, 1773, 1773.1, 1774, 1775, 1776, and 1777.5, and 1777.6. These are the provisions that set forth prevailing wage requirements. It also contains the prevailing wage apprenticeship requirements. And so by including that, you don't have to have the language saying encourage the use of apprentice programs. It would just require that they use apprentices as if it was a prevailing wage project. I would also like to point out that the proposed standards really just ensure the maintenance of the status quo. 99% of the energy storage, utility scale energy storage projects in the last 3 years, ranging from 10 megawatts to 2,000 megawatts, all have been built under project labor agreements. This project's not going to be any different, and if it's a project labor agreement, it's going to meet these other standards as well. What we're trying to make sure is that we're not the exception, that you maintain the standards out there, that is the status quo. I'm not worried about the impact on price, because anyone who has seriously bid on this project would already have assumed that this would be constructed through a PLA, and would know these are complex projects that need the skilled workforce that unions can provide. Finally, the no disparagement clause, or IBW 1245. In this case, IBW 1245 may not be a party to appeal to the PLA, depending on the PLA. But in any case, the
Thomas, your 3 minutes is up.
I was going to say CCP is not going to be negotiating this PLA because it's a procurement project. So those negotiations and what's in it would be a matter between the entity procuring the project and the unions. So you're just giving a preference that they enter into those negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we will have Melissa Yu, followed by Rick Bonilla. And Melissa, when you're ready, if you could please unmute.
Hi, board. I'm Melissa Yu, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Sierra Club. First off, we would like to thank you for all of the policy work that you've done thus far. It's a great start, and we also really appreciate the ongoing discussion. While we support this language, we would like the environmental policy section to be more explicit, specifically suggestions that we sent in to the board in a letter sent on February 22nd. And we hope that in the letter it says that we hope that the projects that CCP must prioritize projects that demonstrate multiple benefits such as public health, economic, or environmental benefits beyond the climate and greenhouse gas reduction benefits. CCP must prioritize projects located in areas designated as renewable energy zones and have received required land use entitlement permits. CCP must avoid projects located in high conflict areas, projects that have not gone through review under CEQA or do not have their relevant land use permits approved. CCP must exclude unbundled RECs from any type of procurement. CCP must prohibit any procurement related to fossil fuel resources, including backup generating sources. And as for the workforce development section, we do agree with the suggestions mentioned by our fellow labor advocates, and we look forward to continuing to work with you to make sure all of CCP's policies have a good foundation, because there is actually an article that came out recently that highlights that California CCA memberships have actually surpassed 200 communities, which is 28% of the utility load, and it's continuing to grow. So we need to make sure we're doing it right from the start. And thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Melissa. Next, we will have Rick Bonilla. And when you're ready, Rick, you could please unmute.
I had to unmute. First, I want to thank, again, everybody who participated in the process of the talks. I want to applaud the committee and the board members for going forth with some policy for the LDS project. I think it's really important, and it builds good faith as we move into the future with the rest of the work that CCP will be doing. And I look forward to a lot of work. I want to say that I think it's very unfortunate that IBW 1245 has been taking the actions they're taking, but it's nothing that I can have anything to do with. I, though, want to applaud the outcome of the talks, and I believe the recommendations that are coming from Mr. Shetler, who I think did a great job on a very short-term kind of work that had to be done quick so we can move forward with this shortlisting and negotiating. I think it's great. So that said, I think James Gomez said it all. I think we do need to, and Tom Enslow, include the labor codes. We need to make sure the apprenticeship language is in there. The prevailing wage must be paid. And I just want to say something I always say to everybody. If it's prevailing wage, then it's not a far leap to get to a project labor agreement. There should be no difference in the price, because if it's prevailing wage, the price on project labor agreements is the same. So once again, thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you, Rick. And Chair, there are no additional hands raised.
Okay, thank you very much for members of the public stakeholders who participated in the discussions with the ad hoc committee and Jim Shetler to provide us input and shape these policies. So I'll bring it back to the board for discussion. And I'll also, given some of the comments here, I'll also invite our interim general counsel. If he has certain comments specifically on the government code issues, feel free to educate us on this. So maybe I'll ask, I have Jeff Cyphers as wanting to speak. So why don't we go with Jeff first?
Thank you. I think my request is for our interim general manager, Jim Chetler, to maybe talk briefly about some of the subsequent requests that we got after the packet was prepared. I think there were some good suggestions there, and that might help us reach a conclusion today if we could hear that. And I think it speaks to some of the public comment as well. Is that okay, Jim?
Absolutely. And Mr. Chairman, do you want me to launch into that, or do you want to ask for more comments from the board before I do that?
No, I think, why don't you give us additional information? I think that will make our discussion with the board even more productive.
That would be
And so
good.
maybe after you talk to it, maybe we'll have Tony add a few comments and then we'll launch into board input.
Sounds good. So a couple comments relative to the input that we've had. As I noted earlier, I did have an opportunity to have some dialogue with representatives from the unions, and I also had the opportunity to work with Greg Spinovich to look at the language that was being proposed, the specific language. And Chris, I wonder if you could pull up that Word document I sent you. So the language that was stated by Tom Enslow and is being proposed by the unions is the substitute language for section 1A, starts with any construction work, and goes through and lists the labor code sections that are applicable. I did have an opportunity to have Greg review these. He's been offered up to help the ad hoc committee as we work through policy issues. And based on Greg's review, he doesn't see anything that's objectionable to the language. Greg, did you want to weigh in anyway?
Yes, the language, the labor code provisions that are cited here are those that would apply whenever you have a requirement that prevailing wages are paid. So, so the language that we see here, it would be acceptable and it's consistent with what was proposed initially by the committee. And it also does actually, as Mr. Enslow said, it really also addresses the apprenticeship question, because under the prevailing wage law, there are apprenticeship requirements. So in fact, it's not necessary to have the section 1B language. And that was also noted yesterday in Mr. Enslow's email. So frankly, if you go with the language shown here as section 1A language, that would be sufficient.
And then as Greg noted and Mr. Enslow noted, I think the section 1B where we reference apprenticeship programs, I think there's probably two options that's available. One is just delete it, and it's already referred to in the labor code. The other is to just say reference it as noted on the language that's set here. I think either one would work. Probably the cleanest would be just to delete the reference. What I did want to do then is maybe talk about some of the other proposals that have been put forward. And the issue we're dealing with is how far do we go in adding new requirements on the procurement that's already been bid, and try not to put ourselves in a position where we might be having bidders seek to raise their prices. So as I look at some of the other proposals on the environmentally friendly materials, I don't know that I have a opposition to that one. I think that's probably something we could accommodate. The issue of local projects is a little more complicated. When we start talking about the long duration storage projects, which are larger storage projects, the location of those are dictated by evaluations and studies that the ISO does, as well as where these projects can be interconnected to the ISO grid. And so we have some limitations on that. So I'm a little hesitant to stress that too far in this change in the conditions. And then the additional environmental language that the Sierra Club is proposing, I would suggest would be better considered as part of our longer term policy discussion, and not try to embed that in the LDS project language.
And I would only add very quickly to Mr. Shetler on that last point, the reference to renewable energy zones would rule out quite a number of areas in which the group may consider projects and may or may not comport with some of the areas that have been identified in the solicitation process as having economic advantages. So there's things to consider if we were to even consider those type of restrictions today.
Thank you, Tony. Jim, is there anything else you want to add?
No, not at this time. And
All right.
hopefully Director Cyphers, that addressed your questions.
It does. Thank you.
So let's go to Tom Habashi.
Yeah, I'm really uncomfortable with the idea of including a whole bunch of codes in a policy statement. I think the policy statement should stand on its own without having to add all these different codes, especially if you are proceeding adding the codes with a statement that says they should adhere to all of these, but not limited to. Why put it in there to begin with? And what if these codes change at one point or another? Do we then have to go back and rehash what we need to negotiate with a contractor based on the changes that happens? So generally, I would prefer not to have all these lists of codes included in any policy statement that we're going to have in this document.
Thank you, Tom. While I wait for maybe additional input, really think it's been very productive to get these suggestions, and I think Jim, in terms of Jim and the stakeholders kind of crafting what we can maybe pull into the LDS and then what we would address in the broader policies. I think that kind of parallel path approach, I think would be very productive moving forward, especially given that we started this RFO process about 4 months before we even started CC Power. So I have those. I would like to also now bring it back to Don Weiss's comment and see if we can have some discussion on that too, because we did not include that in our policy, ad hoc policy discussion.
Yeah, thanks. And I actually, if it's okay, I'd like to just propose some simple language that could be considered. This is language that we used in a PLA with local IBEW local 302 in Contra Costa County, and they were happy to agree to it. I think as long as there's no intention of disparaging other CCAs, there shouldn't be any concerns about including this clause, but the language that we use there could be adopted within any CC Power agreements, and it would go something like this. It would say union representatives to this agreement agree not to make any written or verbal statements about CC Power or its members that are disparaging, untrue, or inaccurate. Doing so will cause the agreement to be void. That's all it is.
Thank you, Don. So let's see. So in terms of moving this forward, we have a couple of things I see, right? So I'd like to get some sense of the board. We do have the enhanced project conditions. We have some language in front of us that has been reviewed by Tony and Greg Stepanisic regarding codes related to prevailing wage that would also subsume the apprenticeship programs. And I think the sense I get from both of you is that it's not really a risk to us, both from a pricing standpoint, et cetera. So I want to make sure that Tom's concerns are kind of at least addressed here. So if we can just close the loop on that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. In terms of the actual contract, there's an issue with the developer that requires prevailing wage. It is our recommendation that we do cite the labor code provisions, because once you require prevailing wages, there are a number of requirements that come into play that in order to comply with that obligation also have to be complied with. So in terms of just reporting and monitoring the payment of wages. So actually, we would suggest ultimately when the language that is put into the contract with the developer, that it would actually reference the labor code provisions. And again, we could say also as amended, because Tom makes a good point. There can't be changes to the law over time, and we want to be consistent with that. But in the end, we would recommend reference labor code provisions.
Yeah. I would note, and just to shed some light on my thought process, my reaction initially was similar to Tom's in that we're talking about a document that may be durable, but and so application, citation to specific code provisions caught my attention. But I do believe these are principles. They are principles limited to this particular solicitation. I think it's likely that the board is going to continue to consider the application of them moving forward, and so I'm comfortable with the citation of specific code provisions. And as Greg noted, we can amend it. We can add language reflecting the subsequent amendments to allow for flexibility of changed law.
All right, thank you, both of you, for that. I kind of see maybe in terms of trying to craft some amendment to the resolution so we can get to vote. Maybe we add that with the change you suggested to incorporate Tom's concern, which is the as amended. I don't think we want to be wordsmithing on the fly, so maybe I could request that non-substantive changes. Maybe the general counsel and I will work on the actual wording. But if it reflects, I'm just going to throw out a straw proposal here, right? We would include the language that Jim Shetler put in there, along with with some amendment language that Tony suggested.
So what I would throw out for consideration, Mr. Chairman, and I would appreciate Greg's opinion on this, is that what we need to do here today, most notably, is to amend the resolution to reflect the discussion of the board. And I don't think that necessarily is the same wording as amending the project principles. And so what I might suggest, and of course I have just drafted this in real time, that we amend the now therefore be it resolved clause to add after the last word evaluation in that phrase, as amended to reflect reference to the applicable provisions of the labor code, including provisions applicable to the payment of prevailing wage and use of apprenticeship programs. And then we would work to amend the principles specific for the LDS to make sure our wording is precise.
I think we're good with, I think my sense of, let's go to Jan. But before there, I think I have enough clarity on this particular issue. Jan?
I'd just like to make a motion to go ahead and do what Tony just suggested for the resolution, also including the provision that that Dawn suggested, and I don't know if it's possible to get those specific words typed up and on the screen for us to see, but I think that makes
I could
sense.
put them into the chat if that would be helpful.
So that would be my motion, to include both of those. I don't know if you want to do those together, if you want to bifurcate those and have two motions.
I think chat is disabled.
Correct. Chat is disabled for this meeting.
So
Don, could you email that to me? Is
Yeah,
there something you can email?
yeah, I can email it to you, Jim.
Perfect. And then he can share it. I see that we have SVC's General Counsel Greg Stepanisic is hand raised. Greg?
Yeah, so I just make one thing to think about with regards to the anti-disparagement language or clause is that if there's going to be a PLA, then that can be inserted. If there's not going to be a PLA, but we just have a developer condition of paying prevailing wages, the unions would not be a party to that agreement. And so therefore the disparagement language there would not be enforceable because the unions aren't party to the agreement. So a couple of things could be done here. If there's a project labor agreement, of course, then that could be included within it. If there's not, I mean, there could frankly be a separate, side letter agreement with the unions that as part of adding these project conditions, there should be a non-disparagement provision in that side letter agreement. So those are a couple of thoughts to consider.
I was going to note, that the board member White's referenced an agreement for one of the projects that MCE developed, and this is an internal document here. There's no party to it, and so this is really a document to guide our own actions.
Okay. Before we go to Tom and then Jeff, I wanted to ask Tony if we include the non-disparagement clause, would that be one of the whereas clauses that we would amend in the resolution? And then get the exact wording in the principles? How would we actually do this to accommodate what Jan, actually there was a motion on the floor, so Jan's motion. So how would we accommodate that?
I'm thinking it's difficult to structure because again, this is an internal document, right? And it's really not an enforceable document against third parties. So we're really expressing the sense of the board that future projects include principles of non-disparagement. As the board considers, how to adopt this, let me put my thinking cap on till crafting some specific language.
Okay, I think from rules of this meeting, I need to have a second to Jan's motion. So
Actually, Garisha was going to second, so I can lower my hand now.
great.
And
So
I
we
can
have-
too, since that's why mine was up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for keeping me on track. So we have a motion from Jan and a second from Tom. So let's open up for discussion with the board. Tom?
I was just going to say that I'm seconding with the understanding that Don's provision will be included. I think it's important that if we gonna adopt language that will be favorable and supportive of labor, that labor also play nice with us. And I think the letter that I've read going to Stockton, it certainly doesn't in any way or shape reflect that. So.
Yeah. And if I may just comment on that, we have worked with a variety of labor organizations. It's obvious that not all labor organizations, they're not speaking with one voice necessarily. We've had very productive conversations with a variety of labor unions. And we look forward to that partnership. Like mentioned before, I think we have a natural bias towards being very strong, having strong relationships with labor. So I do think making this explicit is something that is, it kind of enhances the partnership actually. So I will be supporting that too. So Tony, do you have something that could help to actually put this to make this clear?
I do. I haven't convinced myself whether I'm totally satisfied with it yet. Here is what I would propose as a fourth whereas clause. And my thinking here is that we are really talking about what we're going to do as we develop future projects. And so this is a policy to guide ourselves. I would propose the fourth whereas clause. Whereas CC Power shall consider additional provisions such as non-disparagement clauses in documents supporting specific future projects.
Okay. Let me ask the maker of the motion, Jan, are you satisfied with that?
I guess by saying I don't see the whole thing here.
Honey, would you mind repeating so I can finish? Sorry.
To support specific projects.
Okay. Yeah, that looks fine. I think first you said specific future projects. I just wanted to make sure it applied to this project.
I literally just amended myself in my writing. That's the same issue that occurred to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, that seems fine. Thank you.
Okay, as amended. And Tom, you're good supporting this amended?
I will defer to Dawn. This is not the language that she read, and my second was to support the language that she wanted to put in there. So I will defer to Dawn on this one. If she says yes, then my second stands. Otherwise, it doesn't.
All right, Dawn.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. What I like about the resolution, though, is that it's pretty high level, and it does create the opportunity for us to be more specific in the project agreements, and does reference the no disparagement clauses for the specific agreements. So I think that if we want to maintain the resolution as kind of a high level document, I think this language works. But I'd like to hear if anyone sees concerns about keeping the language high level. I think I can be comfortable with this, knowing that we'll use the more specific language in the LDS project agreements themselves.
Well, let's hear from the board, and that may give Tom some clarity if he wants to stay with that second. I support this. I like the high level because I think it actually is an invitation to engage even further with IBW 1245. It's almost like having a relationship reset if we have it as a high level. And obviously, I support the overall direction we are headed on. So, others on the board who would like to comment on this?
I do wonder if we could delete the word consider. That might make the statement a little stronger. And instead include.
Shall include additional provisions. That's. Yep. Okay. Any comments from the board? Because I'm going to go back to the proposer of the motion and the seconder to see if this is okay.
I think I'm fine with this language.
Okay.
Yeah, and I agree that it needs to be, as long as Dawn is in agreement, then I'm in agreement. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we got the maker of the motion and a second. All right. Tony, Interim General Counsel, anything else that we need to clean up before we go to a vote?
My question to the board would be, do they want to see the remainder of the other provision fleshed out?
Yeah, that was going to be my question as well. And Chris, maybe we could go to attachment A.
So Jim, I just go for it.
So I think the changes that are being suggested here would be to take the language we showed previously with the code references, make that item A and delete item B. I believe that was the proposal. Director Pepper, is that what you think you promoted in your motion?
The one additional item would be in the section 1A language would be when we refer to the labor code provisions, it would be at the end as may be amended.
Yes, correct. Thanks, Greg.
Right. I'm assuming that the resolution takes precedent. So we're actually going to use what we vote on in the resolution and then change these enhanced conditions to reflect it. So 1B would be subsumed, for example. When you're referring to the actual section of the government code as amended, right? And then
Yes.
we'll also craft a statement around we shall include non-disparagement, etc. So okay. So what I'm thinking is we don't need to actually have language in here before the vote for the non-disparagement. That will be added to the enhanced project conditions, right?
Yes, the way you've structured it in the motion, that will be give us direction to include that in the negotiations we have with the developers and impose that on them if they should go in and have a PLA. So yeah, I think we're covered.
Okay, so these two will go together. It's these enhanced project conditions with the resolution that states we shall include a non-disparagement clause. So the two are bound together.
Correct. That would be my interpretation.
All right. So we are on the verge, I think, of asking for a vote unless I hear else differently from Tony.
If you watch your screen there, Chris is typing in the language that I read aloud to reflect the changes in the resolution itself.
Okay. I'm going to see if I don't hear from, I'm assuming that this is good with Jan and the proposer.
Yes.
And good. And Tom is the seconder. Good. So why don't we move to getting a roll call vote on this?
Sonoma Clean Power,
Yes.
East Bay Community Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Central Coast Community Energy,
Yes.
Marin Clean Energy.
Yes.
The resolution as amended is approved unanimously.
Thank you very much for all the board members, Jim, interim general counsel, Greg Stepanisic, all the stakeholders. Not only I think is this a great positive move, but also setting us up for the broader policies for CC Power. So lots of work on this. Thank you very much. So let's now move to item 6D, interim general manager's report. And under this, we have 5 items and 4 for approval. So Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then Chris, could you pull up the slide deck, please? Thank you. So I'm going to walk through the items under section D of the agenda. We have several action items for the board. So let's move to the next slide, please, Chris. And these are the items we'll be talking about. And so let's move to the next slide, Chris. So as the board is aware, we have two entities, Clean Power San Francisco and Valley Clean Energy, who have indicated an interest in joining CC Power. They have submitted the necessary documentation to do so in accordance with the JPA agreement under sections 3.01, 02, and 03. Their governing body has approved the request, and they've demonstrated that in the materials that have been provided. They have agreed to pay their share of startup costs for CPSF. They were a participant in the original cost sharing agreement before CC Power went live, so they've already paid their share. And then for Valley Clean Energy, we have estimated their share would be $10,000, and they've agreed to pay that. In addition, both have agreed to pay their share of ongoing administrative and, to the extent they are participating in any project costs. Per the JPA agreement, approval of new members does require a 2/3 affirmative vote of the board. I'm prepared to take any questions from the board on this, but the staff would request, based on the request we received and reviewing the documentation provided, that the board approve the request for these two agencies to become new members. So I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, we're just going to promote, we just promote Barbara Hale into the panelist group here. Obviously, Barbara and CPSF have been involved in the long duration storage project for a while. And so personally, I'm really looking forward to having VCE and CPSF join our group. So with that, let me open it up to the board for any clarifying comments or questions, I should say. Not seeing any, I'll go to the public, ask if the public have any comments on this item. Not seeing any, I'm going to bring it back and then just maybe ask Barbara and Mitch if they have anything they would like to say to the board before we take a vote.
Sure, I'll start. Baruch, board appreciate the consideration of Valley Clean Energy for membership in CC Power. My board didn't have all the provisions that were necessary, so they followed back up last month. So they're eager to see us join, and look forward to working with you if the board approves our membership. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara?
Thank you. San Francisco is also very anxious to join and advance the good work you guys have already started. So thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Board members, any questions or comments?
I'll move approval.
Perfect. Can I get a second?
Second.
Great. So we have Tom making the motion. Nick is a second. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Sonoma Clean Power.
Yes, definitely.
East Bay Community Energy.
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy.
A resounding yes, yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority.
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy.
An additional resounding yes.
San Jose Clean Energy.
Yes.
Central Coast Community Energy.
Oh, I don't know about that, Barbara, but what the heck? Absolutely, yes.
Let the record reflect aye. Marin Clean Energy.
Yes.
The resolution carries with the required 2/3 vote and more.
Congratulations, and this is big news. Thank you. Just great. Board, we will be reaching out to VCE and CPSF to make sure that we have an appropriate public communications on this. So we work with them. All right, back to our agenda. Item D2.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll go back to the slide deck and work our way through it. So I did want to bring forward a proposed revision to the budget for 2021. It reflects two issues. One, at the last board meeting, the board concurred with a recommendation from the ad hoc committee on general manager selection that we should adjust the hours for the general manager, roughly 60 hours a month, 15 for administrative support, 45 for the LDS project. So the budget reflects that. And then based on the action you just took, we thought it would be appropriate to modify the budget to reflect the fact that we now have 10 members and an additional participant in the LDS project. Next slide, please. So just as a quick reference, this is the budget that the board approved back in February. It was a little over $463,000, a little over $101,000 for general support, $362 for the LDS project. The area we're focused on for change right now in the budget would be the hours and cost associated with the general manager, both in the general support and the LDS project. Next slide, please. So based on that budget, these were the allocations to the members at that time. Obviously, VCE and CPSF were not participants at that time. So the total forecasted for general support was just shy of $13,000. And then the LDS project varied depending on participation, that for the most part, is a little over 58,000 with the exception of Redwood with their smaller share and just shy of 12. Next slide, please. So in adjusting the hours as noted in the recommendation, basically it increases the general support by just about $20,000 and the LDS project by about $18,000, brings the total budget to just shy of $502,000 with the allocation is shown. And then the next slide, please. So the result of the budget increase, but the addition of the two new members actually results in allocations that are slightly lower for both the general support and the LDS project. I will note that the LDS project will change once we get to the short list and participants decide what their interest is in each of the short list projects, if any, and then we will have to reallocate based on that. But based on the initial forecast, this is what we have right now. So next slide, please. So with that, staff would request that the board approve the revised budget and the revised allocations, and be happy to answer any questions.
Questions from board members? Not seeing any hand raises. Any comments from the public? We don't see any, so bring it back and entertain a motion.
Sonoma, I would move approval of the budget.
Second. I see Don Weiss, is that right? Yep.
Yes, I'll second.
Yep, perfect. So Sonoma moves, MCE seconds. Any further discussion? Don't see any hands being raised, so let's go to a vote.
Sonoma Clean Power,
Yes.
East Bay Community Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Central Coast Community Energy,
Yes.
Marin Clean Energy.
Yes.
The resolution to adopt the revised budget to reflect the new members and other changes has been adopted.
Thank you, Tony. We'll go to item D3, an update on the long duration storage project. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next slide, please. And I basically already provided this update to the board as part of the lead-in to the LDS project procurement condition discussion. So I don't think I'll spend any time going over that again. It's in your packet or in the slides and available for those who would wish to review it in any more detail. The next item I would like to go to is item D4. And wanted to talk about project development process. And I know we've had discussion as a board. We've also had discussion with the Project Oversight Committee. And we also had discussion before we became CC Power as to how would we manage projects and programs going forward? How would that be handled? Is there a process for that? And during the course of the formation, I know we talked about the phased approach that many have used in other JPAs. And so wanted to talk to the board about a proposal that staff is making on how at least to start this and tee up a process for doing so. And it's also to talk about how we might apply that to the LDS project. So there is a white paper that's part of the packet, goes into a lot more detail. I'm going to stay at a fairly high level for this discussion. Next slide, please. So what we are proposing is a phased approach to look at new projects or new programs. We had been talking in the past about a 3-phase program. So I did add a 4th, but I made it phase 0. But the concept here is project conceptualization, project exploration, then going into subscription and negotiations and agreements, and finally project commitment and execution. The intent here under conceptualization is that this would be coming up with ideas on what might be new projects. And they could come from a variety of sources, members, regulatory requirements, etc. And the intent would be to develop an initial budget for any project, a schedule, and initial participation agreements. Any project that we would come forward with, we are recommending would have to have a member sponsor. If no member is interested, then I don't know why we would be coming forward with a project. So we think it's appropriate that any project we bring forward would have to have at least one member sponsor. During this initial phase, this is probably pretty much handled by the general manager. We would anticipate that the cost for this would be fairly minimal to start with, would probably come under the normal administrative cost for the agency. But if we determined that more was needed, then we would develop a budget and bring that forward to the board for more specifics. But assuming we had a project of interest, then we would get into, okay, let's explore the details of that project. What's the detailed need? Do we perhaps need to go out with an RFO for development? Maybe result in a short list, developing principles and so forth for a project. We would think this would be a point where we would want to have a project oversight committee of participants that would be advising the general manager. And that depending on the project and the issue involved, may want to consider an ad hoc committee of the board to also be engaged. And the outcome of this would be a set of proposals for going forward into negotiations of a project. And at this stage, we would be looking as far as cost allocation, since we don't know participation, it would be basically one participant, one share. Getting into phase two, this is where we're getting into initial identification of member subscription, maybe negotiating contracts, and detailed agreements among the members. Again, project oversight committee to be advising the general manager on the process. A board ad hoc committee is as appropriate. And for phase two, this is where we would start identifying, okay, the cost should be assigned based on your interest level. So we have identified a preliminary interest level. We know how members are viewing it, and we should be able to assign costs based on some percentage of interest. Out of this would come, assuming there's continued interest, we would then get into finalizing subscription for the project, finalizing the project agreements and executing those agreements and getting into project development. Again, we would still envision that we would have oversight committee involvement with the general manager for implementation. And the board would be approving those agreements and delegating the general manager for execution. And any costs associated with this would be based on the final participant share. So that's kind of a high level concept of how we would deal with projects going forward. I think I'll stop there and see if there's any questions or comments from the board.
Just start with just saying, yeah, this is great, Jim. I think you consulted with the POC, and the POC has taken a look at it. And I think this is a real would help with other projects, and of course the LDS project, which I believe you're going to go into next.
Yes.
So, but this is in general for any project. This would be the process that we use. So sounds like you did a great presentation on that one. I'm not seeing any hands raised. So Jim, go on.
All right, let's go to the next slide, please. So for the LDS project, we're in a little different situation, and we've talked about this already. Basically, CC Power has been handed a project in midstream. For all practical purposes, the project conceptualization was done under the RFI, RFO process that the members initiated last year. And part of the project exploration effort has been developed and done as part of that. So we're kind of coming in phase one. So what we're doing now is finalizing the evaluation and short list. And as we noted before, developing principles and agreements and establishing the negotiating team, which we've done. Again, we do have a POC in place, and we are recommending we would continue with that. We talked about potential for board ad hoc committee. And one thing I'm suggesting for a couple of reasons. One, this is the first project for CC Power. And second, not necessarily the best thing to be doing, but reality is reality. We will be looking at shifting general manager assignments here in the not too distant future. So a new general manager will be coming in probably in the June timeframe. And so that it may also be helpful to have some kind of a board ad hoc or oversight committee to assist with that transition as well. So I'm suggesting, obviously this is the board's decision, suggesting that perhaps the chair and vice chair might be named as an advisory committee to the general manager for this initial project. And again, for phase one, cost allocation was one participant, one share. We will be hopefully soon moving into phase two. The intent is to, as I mentioned earlier, get to shortlisting by the end of the month. At which point, I'm assuming in May, we will be determining initial member subscription and finalizing agreements that need to be executed. We will continue with the POC and the general manager with the negotiating team. I would again advise I think it's good to have the board committee involved in this. We will be moving for phase 2, and I mentioned that we would be adjusting the budget when we get here to a % share based upon this initial forecast. And then assuming we can get to a acceptable set of negotiated agreements, then we would also move to a phase 3, similar to what we talked about before. So this is kind of the proposal on how we modify the standard process to deal with the LDS project. So I'll stop there, see if there's any board questions or comments.
Thanks for volunteering Don and I to be on the ad hoc committee. But no, this is good. I think especially with the transition, I think having that for this process would be good. Okay, looking for comments from the board. I'm not seeing raised hands. Any comments, questions, any comments? Oh, let me get back. So Tom? Please unmute.
I'm assuming that along the way, we will, the board will be briefed on how the negotiations are going. So in other words, it's not going to be just the 3 of you guys going in and concluding negotiations and bring us a complete product, right?
Okay, Jim, go ahead.
Sure. So yes, we will keep the board apprised. There's 2 methods for doing that. The primary will be through your representative to the Project Oversight Committee, because there are probably certain negotiating issues and statuses that we might not necessarily want to do in open session. And then obviously we can also do that as an issue comes up, and depending on the importance level, I can have a individual discussion with board members on particularly thorny issues. Now, from a general board and that standpoint, we will be providing you a general status, but it'll be very high level.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
If I may just put a point on that, obviously all of us are used to being very involved in the details in our day-to-day jobs as CEOs, but in our role as the board over here, and we want to preserve some confidentiality through the negotiation process. And this is where we are headed, right? It's actually negotiating the authority to the general manager, just as we are delegated authority by our boards. So it's your POC representative is where you can get all the details you want through your POC representative. But at the board level, Tom, you will actually get presented, we'll all get presented pretty much a contract, just like our boards. And it's just for this particular, because of the transition with Jim in the middle of this process, we thought having an ad hoc committee just to allow for that next general manager to be onboarded effectively. It'll be good to have a couple of us knowing more of the details. All right, so any members of the public have any questions? Comments, I should say. Not seeing any hands raised, I'll bring it back to the board and entertain a motion.
Yeah, Chris, could you bring up the resolution? Maybe go past the whereases.
Okay.
Staff is requesting basically 2 actions from the board, if you will, consider it. One is to accept the general process for at least an initial way of dealing with projects, and then approve the delegations to the interim general manager for the LDS project as outlined. And embedded in that would be also agreeing to establish the oversight committee from the board.
Ad hoc. Yep.
Ad hoc, thank you.
I'll move approval.
Okay. Motion to approve by Tom.
I'll second, Jan.
Second from PC Jan Pepper. Any further discussion from the board? Not seeing any raised hands. Can we get a vote, roll call vote?
Sonoma Clean Power,
Yes.
East Bay Community Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Central Coast Community Energy,
Yes.
Marin Clean Energy.
Yes.
The resolution carries.
Are we including Valley and San Francisco as well? No. Okay.
So
No,
it's probably worth clarifying the process, and we had discussions with they're not formal members until all the documents are executed, and so they're here today as part
Understood.
of our community. But
Thanks.
All right. Jim, you want to move to item B5?
yes, please. Chris, back to the slide deck, please. So I'm about a couple slides down, please. One more, there we go. So as I mentioned earlier, we're getting close to finalizing the round 2 evaluations for the LDS project proposals. And we're getting close to shortlisting. And with that in mind, we need to start looking at some of the agreements that will be needed to go forward with those who are selected on the short list. And so we have both a non-disclosure agreement and an exclusivity agreement that we are planning on using to be executed between CC Power and those shortlisted project developers. These agreements have been developed by our negotiating team in consultation and concurrence with the POC. And we are seeking approval of the board for the agreements and delegating authority to the interim general manager to allow me to execute those agreements once we do a final selection of the shortlisted projects for negotiation.
I would add here, Mr. Chairman, just to give the board a little bit of background on the process. So Project Council took the lead in developing these agreements. They were reviewed and revised by General Counsel. There was, as Jim had indicated, circulation and comment from the POC, and they were made available to member council as well. So there, I would add there the non-disclosure agreement and the exclusivity agreement, to my mind, are fairly standard, and I don't see any issues here associated with that I would specifically raise to the board.
Thank you, Tony. Before I call on Jeff, who has his hand raised, I'll mention that Project Council is Kevin Fox, and he is in the attendee list. If there are specific questions, we can bring him in to answer too. And I'll also mention that Carrie Bentley, our lead negotiator, is also on the attendee list. So Jeff?
I think I'm just flagging that this is the kind of thing that I'd like future policies to be able to delegate authority down to staff to do without bringing to the board. Understanding we're young, we don't have that policy in place yet, but just flagging that, that's all.
Thank you. Great suggestion. We'll incorporate that. Any clarification questions from the board? Not seeing any hands raised. Any comments from the public? Not seeing a hand raised there. Bring it back and we'll entertain a motion for approval from our board.
So moved. Sonoma.
Second.
Okay, Sonoma and 3CE. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Sonoma Clean Power,
Yes.
East Bay Community Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Central Coast Community Energy,
Yes.
Marine Clean Energy.
Yes.
The resolution is approved.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. I just know how much water you had to drink because there's so much work you did. You had to explain all this stuff. So thank you very much. Excellent work, GM and GC. So let's move to item 6E, discussion of individual member items. I wanted to specifically talk about input on future project ideas, just to start discussing this, right? So we've got stakeholder input about what CC Power may be doing in the future. You know, that that's where we were talking about policies, et cetera. I just want to start the discussion kind of more blue sky. What do you think you'd want CC Power to do at some point in the future? I've had more informal conversations with you all, but I'd like to just have this kind of discussion with the entire board present. So I'm going to call on Tom Habashi.
Oh, right. Quite a few actually that CC Power could be doing. One is the one that I've already mentioned once and it came up today, and that's for CC Power to adopt, taking on an additional 500 megawatt, maybe more, of storage units that will be of the size of 1 to 5 megawatt, and it will be scattered throughout our service area. They would come in not only as a way to deal with reliability of the system and reliability of the grid, but also as means to allow for backup power supply for some of them, our members, the cities that we serve, or some of the large customers that we have that have critical load that need to be served, whether that to be hospitals and so on and so forth. If we could take it as a very large project and perhaps qualify a couple of contractors and do the work, the engineer work that's required to identify all the different places where these resources can go. We can do it also in working with somebody like PG&E, working with PG&E, because we'll be able to identify certain places where it'll be easy to hook up to the distribution system, and at the same time help them defer some of the distribution upgrades that they have to do. There are lots of ways that we can get people that would want to cooperate and work with us on it, whether that to be PG&E, our customers, or our member agencies. I think this is something that that we should pursue, at least to see the feasibility of it. And I got quite a few others that I can go on for another hour, but I'm going to stop here and give some room for other folks to share some of their ideas.
Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate that. And I'll go to Nick next. Nick?
So I have certainly numerous ones that could share, but I think two that are top of mind for me are, one is a joint effort around demand response. One of the challenges we have, I think each of us probably have, as we think about demand response is, our service territories are, by virtue of our focusing on our communities are smaller than, the broader PG&E TAC area, for instance, which limits some opportunities for for load modifying demand response. And currently, under the PUC rules, we are capped at how much resource adequacy, for instance, we can count from demand response, but there's really no effective cap on demand response as a load modifier, so physically modifying our load. So I think there could be something interesting where we get together and, in so doing, we have a much larger geographic area to be able to target where the demand response comes from, and then we figure out a way to effectively trade amongst ourselves to be able to unlock a lot more potential for load modifying demand response. So I think that's one. I do think that there are opportunities for back office efficiencies that we could pursue through CC Power, be it data management services, customer service services, or scheduling. You know, we each are individually paying our vendors, and you know, I think we've all observed that there are volume pricing does exist. The more customers you have, the better the price you get. But we're all certainly, again, kind of at a threshold. If you were to go from 500,000 to 3 million meters, I think that there's real cost efficiencies that can be gained. So those are two specific examples.
Thanks. This is great. Just as a note, we're going to keep this kind of list as a running list so we can kind of bring this back, but great ideas. Jeff?
Yeah, I'll offer two as well. I think having CC Power consider in maybe 1 to 2 years being a central administrator for all CPUC funded programs could be very effective and allow the CCAs to focus on the delivery of those programs and the administration rather than the paperwork and the processing. That could be a really useful tool. And then the other thought is near term, the Diablo Canyon replacement proceeding at the commission is closing in on what the ordered procurement is going to be. And currently staff are recommending 1,000 megawatts of geothermal, which is more than exists in the state of California to develop currently. So that's ambitious, but I think it will be scaled down. But I think at least hundreds of those megawatts will likely be ordered. And one thought is to go to the legislature and request a couple of things, and then procure all of that on behalf of all LSEs, and then recoup our costs from the IOUs for their share. That does require legislation, is my understanding. And the thing that likely makes that really effective is that we have guaranteed cost recovery. I think that brings down the price and makes us as effective as the IOUs who have statutory guaranteed cost recovery, and that's why they have good credit, even in bankruptcy. And I think that that kind of tool of going out and procuring large scale is something that, let's not limit it to long duration storage. I think we can think about, we're already buying almost all the renewable energy projects in the state of California now. The munis are relatively procured and the IOUs are super long. So we're the ones out there with the procurement experience now, and have most of the active procurement staff in the whole state. So I think let's leverage that to the state's benefit and be essentially the mature organizations that we have become very quickly, and think about that. Thanks.
Great. Excellent, excellent ideas. Other thoughts?
I can share one more if
yeah.
And I think that's something that you're familiar with, Krish, working with SCAPA, the financing authority, to help, at least in the case of SCAPA, it was to fund energy efficiency and programs. And in this case, I'm thinking a finance authority to fund electrification programs. The way we're approaching it now, and I think most of you are, if you're taking on certain programs, you are doing a little at a time and having to spread a few $1 million in 6 different ways in order to do as many programs as you possibly can. Creating a financial authority that will help issue bonds and pass those bonds on to the members, they can then do a whole lot more than what they can do in 1 year with the limited dollar amount that they have. Then use that limited dollar that they have to pay off the bonds over a number of years by taking on some larger projects and do a lot more electrification than they do today. We are being approached by a lot of people in Santa Cruz and a few other places to start a bank, the People's Bank, they call it. And it's more specific for what government entities would like to do, and they don't want to go to private banks to do it. And I don't see why we can't, given the kind of power that we have, and when I say power, I mean the amount of money that we have in reserves. Why we couldn't start our own bank, our own CCA bank, for example. I know that there will be lots of stuff that has to go into it, but right now, all of our money is invested in one place, maybe 2 or 3 different banks that we deal with. And I don't see why we couldn't have our own bank with that kind of money flowing back and forth on a daily basis with the CCS.
Phenomenal. I just love the spectrum of ideas over here, really. And, it's really related to the 4 phases that Jim talked about, the phase 0 through 3. So this is just the start of it, right? We'll talk about it a little bit. And then I think in a way we'll get to phase 0, start to kind of lay out the viability of something like this. And I can see some patterns over here already on, what we can put out as phase 0. So we'll work with Jim to see if we can kind of templatize some of this. And this is also going to be very useful for the new general manager that we're going to get in, the new interim general manager, right? Because this would be something that that person's going to carry on to form going from phase 0 to phase 1. So excellent ideas. Any other thoughts? I have Matthew Marshall. Matthew.
Yeah, I'll throw offshore wind on the list, since that's a topic of interest to us, definitely. And I think, I think you guys are all probably aware that the Biden administration is kind of ramping up on that front, and set a target of 30 gigawatts by 2030. Most of that'll be on the East Coast, but I think it's pretty likely that by the end of this year or the beginning of next year, in that time frame, there'll be a California lease auction for federal lease areas. And so I think us being proactive about that would be great.
Phenomenal. Any other suggestions? Okay, this is great. We'll, as I said, we'll make a list, and of course the minutes will reflect this, but these are really good. All right. We have any other discussion on individual member items for the good of the group? No, I don't see any. All right, this meeting is adjourned at 2:45 p.m. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.